Ukrainian drones have struck deep inside of Russia, this time igniting oil refineries and fuel depots in Saratov, Orsk, and Feodosiya. The fires there burned for hours as the emergency crews failed to contain them. Those refineries are not just industrial assets. They are the engines of the Kremlin's war machine. Every barrel refined there, it powers Russian tanks, Russian trucks, and Russian warplanes. Each explosion destroys production capacity and drains the limited cash that Moscow has left. Those same refineries today, they help Russia to put its budget together. Without them, Moscow has no money. But that budget, in turn, finances the regional subsidies. Those subsidies buy loyalty from the governors and the warlords. And no region in Russia receives nearly as much federal money per capita as Chechnya. And while the refineries burn, another kind of spectacle unfolds very far from the front line. In Grozny, Chechnya, a 17-year-old rides through the streets in a convoy of armored vehicles. On his wrist, a $9 million watch with over 1,000 diamonds. Cameras follow him as if he were royalty, and in a sense he is. His name is Adam Kadyrov. He is the son of Ramzan Kadyrov, the Kremlin's enforcer and ruler of Chechnya. Ramzan controls his republic through fear, patronage, and Moscow's money, and every refinery that Ukraine destroys makes that control more expensive to maintain. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. Within Russia itself, it's a complicated place. It's much more than many people think. And one of the things that Russia has a lot of problems with is Chechnya. And as you'll see today, the conflict that occurs there, the reason that we see this sort of opulent wealth being flaunted, is for a reason that you would probably not guess, something that you've never heard of before. But before we dig into this today and why this is all not good signs for Moscow, just help me with one thing. I checked this morning and we were just short of our goal of 250,000 subscribers, which is an impressive feat. It's been less than 6 months that this channel has been going, and we've reached this point thanks to you, which is greatly appreciated. So please, if you haven't already, help us get across the finish line. Help us get 250,000 subscribers. And for those of you who are already subscribed, please do like this video. Please share it with others and leave your comments below. And you can always consider becoming a channel member today. And one other thing, very good news. We passed our goal of 50,000 euros raised for the Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones. I greatly appreciate everyone who donated, and also, of course, to the donor who matched all of these donations. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. So if you haven't yet made a donation, you are free still to do so. The link still works, and it will be pinned in the first comment below. Thank you. So let's take a look at this. We have to understand that first, the Kadyrov dynasty did not rise from loyalty to Russia, but because they betrayed the Chechens. They betrayed Chechen independence. So during the Second Chechen War, Ramzan Kadyrov's father, Ahmad Kadyrov, defected from the separatists, and he decided to switch sides. He abandoned the dream of an independent Ichkeria, which is the name that Chechnya goes by now, and joined Moscow's fight against his very own people. But in return, Putin made him a deal. He made him the Kremlin's man in Grozny, granting him total control over the republic and all of its reconstruction funds. Now, when Ahmed was assassinated in 2004, Putin installed his son, Ramzan, as his replacement. Ramzan, then aged 27, rebuilt Chechnya with federal subsidies and also with blood money. His private army, the Kadyrovtsi, they became Putin's loyal shock troops, used not only in Chechnya but also in Ukraine and in Syria. This loyalty was bought. It was not earned, and every time that he does something, it's because he is paid. But that's why he should worry about something like Saratov or Feodosiya now burning. That's where Moscow's money comes from. Moscow has to keep him happy because Grozny has proved to be a very complicated city for the Russians. Consider this. The imperial dynamic between Moscow and Grozny is centuries old. It's by no means new. In the 19th century, Tsarist Russia fought a brutal war to conquer the Caucasus. Chechens, under leaders like Ivan Shamil, resisted the Russians and their expansion for many decades. But in the course of this, villages were burned, populations deported, and the region was forcibly annexed into the Russian Empire. That conquest truly never ended and is continuing today. Each new Russian regime, Tsarist, Soviet, or Putin's, has used violence and bribery to keep Chechnya under control. The Kadyrov family is just the latest expression of that system, the vassals that are paid to rule a conquered land in the Kremlin's name. Their wealth and their power, it depends entirely on Moscow's willingness to keep the money flowing. The problem for Moscow is that the money today is running out. Just consider this. From January to October, total federal revenue, it grew just by 0.8%. In October, it fell by nearly 12% compared to the year before. Oil and gas receipts are down 21% across 10 months, with 27% in October alone. Non-oil revenues, which had risen by 11%, they slipped 3% during the same period. As Moscow is receiving less revenues, it has a different problem, and that is that spending is only increasing. War wages, munitions, and internal security has pushed federal outlays up another 15%. The deficit is already close to $100 billion. That means that today, each bond sale and withdrawal from the National Wealth Fund is buying a little bit of time, but it's not buying solvency. The fundamental fundamentals of the Russian economy are not sustainable. But there's something else. Those subsidies to Chechnya and the other dependent regions in Russia are becoming much harder to sustain. Chechnya's regional budget is 58% financed by the federal transfers of money. That means without that money, Chechnya would have virtually nothing. Those funds for Moscow, they pay for the luxury projects, the propaganda, the security forces that enforce loyalty. Now, it's probably not surprising that Kadyrov has 96 relatives that hold public offices. Almost all of them manage public money. For instance, his daughter, who was once the Minister of Culture, she now runs a $17 million mineral water enterprise. We see that public offices in Grozny is something of a family property, not about public service. Each refinery that Ukraine destroys makes this arrangement, however, harder to finance. Less oil revenue means less taxes collected, and less taxes collected means fewer transfers to the warlords. The Feodosiya terminal strike destroyed 2 large tanks used for naval fuel. Now, if they can't use sea transport, it means they have to go by bridge. But longer hauls over the Kerch Bridge raises transport costs. It delays deliveries. It drives up insurance. But consider this. The Budanovsk-Starvelin gas processing plant that we saw eliminated, well, guess what? That was 2 billion cubic meters of output per year. That's about 71 billion cubic feet. So when production halts, local industries shut down. Regional revenues, they evaporate. So Moscow must replace those losses with new subsidies, which then further deepens the deficits. The Kremlin is trapped in a feedback loop, borrowing to cover holes created by the same strikes that make borrowing costlier. Each month, it must choose between paying its soldiers, its governors, and its warlords, such as Kadyrov. Paying all three is becoming impossible. This problem, though, is also not new in Russian history. It's simply becoming more visible all over again. Look back in 1998 at the overborrowing and the collapse of oil prices that triggered a default and devaluation. In 2014, sanctions and cheap oil forced the government to drain its reserves to prop up its banks. Now we see the same pattern repeating again. Today it's under war conditions with one difference. The infrastructure itself is being destroyed faster than it can be replaced. Domestic banks are being forced to buy more state bonds to keep the government afloat. That leaves less credit for private industry, and inflation spreads across the country. Now, every single household in Russia feels the effects of this war economically. As the ruble weakens, imported goods become more expensive. This erodes living standards across the country. The Kremlin's budget, however, depends more on fear than on numbers, and even fear is losing its value. So just look at this example. Adam Kadyrov's display in Grozny is actually not about vanity. It's about sending a message. It tells Moscow that the loyalty of the Kadyrov clan is still very costly. It will take money to keep them on their side. But today, the price is rising. But that message is being weakened every single time that a refinery is struck. That money that was once plentiful is simply no longer there. Russia has less of it. And Putin must also doubt what he will do with the Kadyrovs. Keep in mind, when Prigozhin had his uprising back 2 years ago, we saw that he got all the way to Rostov. Now the Chechens were only about 100 kilometers or about 60 miles away. They were supposed to be loyal to Putin. They're to defend him no matter what. But according to them, despite hours and hours of arriving, they never appeared. They seem to fear a conflict with Prigozhin. They seem to fear the Wagnerites. So today we have to ask ourselves, what does Ramzan Kadyrov really provide for Putin? Now, Kadyrov himself is a twisted and sick man who seems to enjoy engaging in torture. At the beginning of the war, he received as a gift a Ukrainian POW who he enslaved. This is something he videotaped and published. That's why we know it happened. But there's something else. He is somebody who is not very intelligent. In fact, he's quite dumb. So Kadyrov has another problem. He might not see the writing on the wall, though those around him, they do. That's why his own soldiers today seem to be avoiding the war in Ukraine. They're sent there, but they've developed a reputation. They're called TikTok soldiers. And that's because they like to post videos of them shooting weapons, but very clearly, they're not in combat. Very clearly, they're nowhere near the front. But they post videos showing that they're fighting, that they're working hard. But this is just to get the impression, give the impression that they are valuable, that they must be had. But the fact is, they're not very valuable. They fear conflict. But there's something else even more important. They're most loyal to Kadyrov and the money he gives them, not to Moscow. So if tomorrow, if there was a conflict with Moscow, if Moscow, again, now many times in the past couple of centuries, sought to seize Grozny, it's not clear whose side he would be on. He could turn against Moscow. Given how weak Moscow is today, it's very possible that he would succeed. Now, it's unrealistic for different reasons, just the history that he has with Moscow. However, he has to flaunt this whenever he has a chance. He has to remind Putin that he always has other options. Putin is not his end-all. This is something that makes the Russians worry. Keep in mind, their wars with Chechnya have historically gone very bad. In fact, it was only because the Russians totally shelled and destroyed Grozny that they're able to capture it. But to do that, they lost tons of soldiers. Imagine this, massive Russia against very small Chechnya, and the Chechens held off the Russians for a very long time. But today, Vladimir Putin cannot afford this sort of a war. He cannot afford a new conflict, a new front, somewhere like Grozny. And that's why instead he has to choose where he spends his money, and he chooses to spend it on people like Kadyrov. Buying his loyalty prevents another front from opening it up. So today when we look at the situation, there's something very interesting. We see that the smoke over Saratov and the diamonds on Adam Kadyrov's wrist are part of the same ledger. One shows how quickly Russia's wealth is burning, but the other shows who has been pocketing what remains of Russia's wealth. And when the treasury can no longer fund both the war and the luxury goods, it will be a question as to what will survive. But increasingly, it seems that the refineries will not stop burning. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with others. And see in the first comment how you too can donate for the Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.